committee that decides the rules of the road by which they will play and by which so many of our fellow Americans suffer? How do we explain how the world's greatest democracy is having such a hard time balancing its budgets or just keeping the doors open and the lights on at this moment? It is because those in power and in positions of public trust increasingly do not answer to you, they answer to the highest bidder. I want to make sure that this latest concentration of power and wealth and privilege provokes a similar progressive response to the one we saw in the age of Theodore Roosevelt. That we return power back to people, that our elected representatives no longer take political action committee contributions. For 5 years running, I've not accepted a single dime from a single PAC. In this presidential campaign, we are funded 100% by human beings, our fellow Americans, not a single corporation or special interest or even lobbyists allowed to participate in this election, at least as far as we are concerned. Because the challenges before us are the greatest that we have ever faced. Beyond those who cannot afford their prescriptions, in some cases just to keep them alive, we have tens of millions of our fellow Americans who cannot see a doctor. We have, in some states like mine, the largest mental health care provider being the county jail system, to the point that those with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and clinical depression too often are getting arrested on purpose to go to the one place where they're guaranteed the care that they need to make life temporarily bearable at an extraordinary cost to you and to me and those lucky enough to have the means to pay taxes or to have insurance as our rates go up and our premiums increase. The single largest inpatient mental health care facility in the state of Texas, a state of 20 million people, is the Harris County Jail. And it costs the taxpayers in our state $110 a night to keep someone locked up, to go to the one place that they can count on for the care that they need. For a fraction of that cost, we can provide consistent, high-quality, universal outpatient mental health care services. That person is no longer locked up. Their potential is no longer confined. They are free to lead the life that they were placed on this planet to live, contributing in the taxes that they pay, the burden that they shoulder so that it rests a little bit lighter on the rest of us, the families that they raise, the schools that they attend, the jobs that they themselves might create as small business owners. Whatever they are supposed to do, I want them to be well enough to do it. How do we meet that challenge? Universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care for every child, for every man, for every woman in this country ensures not only that we meet our moral commitments to one another at a moment that we have the means to do so, it also ensures that we use the resources we have in a far more effective and efficient way. Universal health care may sound like an expensive proposition, but it is a hell of a lot cheaper than the way that we pay for care today in the emergency room, in the county jail, or in those lives led that are diminished or cut short unnaturally. I want to make sure that we are up to that challenge as a people. When it comes to opening up this economy to everyone, an economy that is on fire today for very few people, for corporations already sitting on record piles of cash, but is increasingly out of reach for far too many millions of our fellow Americans working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Because no one working full-time at $7.25 an hour has enough resources to put food on the table, pay the note on their mortgage, be able to buy those prescription medications that they may need to stay alive. And so they're working 2 and 3 jobs. They may be the same parents of those kids who on the first day of kindergarten are starting back 10 months in reading comprehension, 12 months in math. It's those parents who do not have the luxury to read to their kids before they go to sleep because they're busy working that second or third job. How do we open up this economy to everyone? How do we meet that challenge? A minimum wage that is a living wage so that no one has to work more than one job is a great place to start. If we add to that the ability to take time off paid so that you can take care of yourself, your folks, or your kids without losing your income or your job, if we confront the fact that women in this country today in 2019 are paid 80 cents on the dollar for what men make in this country, and that African American women are paid 61 cents on the dollar for what a white man makes, and that Latinas in this country are paid 53 cents on the dollar for what a white man makes. We need to make sure that we ban discrimination in the workplace, but also ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, so constitutionally we can never treat anyone in this country different than anyone else is in. And then we need to make sure that we are training the workforce that we need here in Iowa. I read a story this morning that says one of the greatest challenges to economic growth in this state, in fact, they are revising their estimates downwards for the growth of Iowa going forward, is the fact that we are creating more jobs than we have the skilled workforce in this state to work them. There's a disconnect here right now. And so in order to bridge that gap, here are a few ideas. What if we allowed teachers to earn a living wage so they only work one job, focusing on those kids, unlocking their lifelong love of learning? Once we do that, there's no stopping that kid, and there's no stopping this state or this country. We made it a little bit harder on our public school educators when in 2017, Iowa said they could no longer organize, they can no longer collectively bargain, they can no longer ensure that they are paid decently, and most importantly, that the next generation of teachers are paid decently. And guess what? We have a teacher shortage in Iowa right now, and those teachers that you paid to train in the first place are teaching school right now in Minnesota. Calculus, physics, mathematics teachers going where they are paid to measure it with their value. If we have a world-class public school system where we invest in the necessary resources in those classrooms, including the pay for those instructors, we're going to get more highly trained and educated kids. If we ensure that they have a path to higher education that is not limited by their income or their fortune or their fate, going to community college for free, earning an associate's degree so that they are now armed with the skills, with the trade, with the training to be able to work those jobs that we're creating right now. If we elevate instead of bring down the power of unions, ensure that the trades that they can teach, the skills that they can provide, without adding a single dime of debt to the backs of those young people or older people whose jobs have been automated out of existence and need additional training to get back into the workforce, then, maybe just then, we can meet the workforce demands here in this state and in every single state. If we do all of that together, this economy begins to work for everyone. A couple more ideas. More than 1 million young people in this country, just as American as my kids or yours, we call them dreamers, born somewhere else, brought here at a young age, contributing to this country's shared success and greatness, and yet more than 1 million of them living in constant fear of deportation back to a country whose language they probably no longer speak, where they no longer have family that they know of, where if we send them there and against those odds they are successful, that success will benefit that place. It won't benefit this community. It won't benefit Iowa. It will not benefit the United States of America. A moment at which this country is meeting the desperation of asylum seekers who are fleeing the deadliest countries on the face of the planet. Things so bad there that families are willing to walk 2,000 miles, ride part of that journey atop, not inside of a train that they call the Beast or La Bestia, to come here desperate, seeking asylum, wanting to follow our own asylum laws, as so many of our ancestors did in the case of the O'Rourke's back in the 19th century, probably fleeing famine that claimed the lives of more than 1 million people in Ireland, coming to the one country on the planet that would take them in, and then doing everything in our power to contribute to this country's success. That's what those families from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador are trying to do right now. And the way that we have met them, putting that child in a cage, deporting that mother who risked her life to bring him here back to the very country from which she fled, separating those families with no prospect or hope of ever seeing each other again, visiting a torture that I hope that we can only begin to imagine because we will never experience it ourselves. That is what is being done in your name and mine right now. We have a chance to make this right. Not only ensuring that we we never again separate families at their most desperate and vulnerable moment, using every power within our command to reunite those families who have been torn apart already, and then rewriting this country's immigration laws in our own image to reflect the best values and traditions of the United States of America, firmly focused with an eye towards the future of our success, ensuring that those dreamers are forever freed from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens in this, their true home country, asking millions more to come out of the shadows, get right with their government so that we know who is in our communities, making us demonstrably safer in the process, revising our visa quotas so more people can do the work that today is unfilled in Iowa and in Texas, or join their families, or contribute to our success and our economic growth. That's not a Democratic Party idea or a Republican Party principle. That is an American value, and we can come together around that shared challenge. The last one, and the most important one. We know now, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that this planet has warmed 1 degree Celsius just since the year 1980. I was 8 years old. That is over the warming that we had seen pre-industrial revolution. So we also know beyond the shadow of a doubt that this was not caused by God. It's not a function of Mother Nature. This one is on us. Our emissions, our excesses, our inaction in the face of the facts and the science and the truth. We've known about global warming since the 1950s. There was political consensus forming in the 1980s, and yet here we are in 2019, and it has taken the Missouri River busting through those levees, drowning and flooding towns like Pacific Junction, the farms around it, which are lakes today, the grain that was stored that is now spoiled, was uninsured, those farmers already underwater in debt, now literally underwater because of this flooding. And it came at a time of historic runoff into the Missouri River Basin. In fact, the greatest runoff since we've been keeping records of the Missouri River. On the other side of the state, next to the Mississippi, Davenport has seen the highest levels of flooding. In fact, they broke the record last set in 1993. In my home state, Houston, Texas, saw 58 inches of rain just from one storm. The landfall record from a single storm for as long as we've been keeping records in North America. California, epic wildfires following epic droughts and epic infestations of beetles that turned those living trees into dead tinder, that is consuming not just property, but lives, including the lives of first responders and firefighters. Climate change, obviously, I hope to all of us, is here. And we have a chance, the scientists tell us, over the next 10 years, that's all that's left to us, about a decade, to get this right. If we do everything within our power, if we allow farmers to lead the way, give them the opportunity to make a profit doing a public, national, global good, by capturing more of that carbon that's in the air, by using, for example, cover crops, if we pay them for sequestering that carbon in the soil and disturbing less of it that is there, by opening up technologies like precision tilling or no-till farming, if we convert from a dependence on fossil fuels to renewable energies, if every single one of us does all that we can, convenes the other powers of the planet to do their part as well, then we can prevent this world from warming 1 or 2 degrees more, and forever afterwards consigning the future generations to destruction and devastation that we can only begin to imagine. For all of those challenges and all of our opportunities to meet them, I am here with you today seeking your support, your help to serve as your next President of the United States of America. Thank you all for having us out here today. Appreciate it.
Beto, thank you very much for coming. One of the problems I have with the Democratic Party right now in general is when you talk about immigration, what they really don't talk about is climate change, which is the number 3 major item for the Joint Chiefs of Staff to look at, not only because of the rising seas, but because of the displacement of people. Climate change is not really accommodated in our structure for bringing people into the country. So you're right that the areas of the Gulf and the Middle American areas, a lot of those folks are coming not just because they're threatened, but because they've been in drought forever, and they're starving, and they need to move their families up here. So are you committed to changing the immigration policy? You mentioned your family background. A lot of people came here because of the potato famine or because of other reasons, that were not about being persecuted,
right,
but because they needed to live and provide a living for their family. Are you committed to changing the immigration policy to accommodate climate change in its biggest sense, which is refugees who are escaping the climate that we've created?
Yes, and I'm so glad that you brought this up. There were 400,000 apprehensions at our border last year, and I described what many of those apprehensions looked like. They weren't people who tried to flee border patrol, evade arrest. They turned themselves in because they're fleeing some of the deadliest places on the face of the planet. But increasingly, in their numbers are farmers from Honduras that have seen epic droughts. They're planting, but what they plant is no longer growing. They cannot feed themselves, sustain their communities or their country, and they are coming north. No wall, no matter how big, how beautiful, no matter spending $30 billion on it, no matter it's stretching 2,000 miles, is going to shut out that kind of desperation. Those farmers, those families are doing what I would do in the same position, perhaps what you would do if faced with the same conditions. The civil war in Syria was preceded by the most severe droughts seen in that ancient country in its recorded history, pushing people out of rural areas where they could no longer grow and sustain themselves on the food that they used to provide to the rest of the country, pushing them into the cities and providing additional tinder for that civil war that then erupted and produced one of the greatest humanitarian catastrophes, one of the greatest refugee outflows that we have seen since World War II. Yemen, where Saudi Arabia, with our help, is bombing indiscriminately the people of that country, is on the brink of mass starvation. 7 million people on the very edge of it in one of the most water insecure parts of the world. So if we do not involve ourselves in the solution, we do not try to address these conditions on the ground, if we do not change course as a country, it's not as though we can shut out those problems from coming to us, because they are right now. And so thank you for reminding us that this country has accepted those who have no other place to go, not just because of persecution, not just because of violence and brutality and death, but also because of famine that is now being caused by climate change that we, this country, perhaps more than any other, helped to produce. So we've got a responsibility and a role to play.
They also bring a lot of the skills that we need here in central of the United States. We have 4,000 so-called undocumented people working up in Sioux County alone in the cattle industry and everything else. Why not legalize these folks and bring some of these climate refugees over here who know how to deal with the very things that we need job-wise in terms of that. And the second thing is Australia now is in the 6th year of a drought in Western Australia. And so the cattle and the sheep are dying by the tens of thousands there because there's no water and nothing to eat. And there's actually an article I gave one of your people that from Time Magazine recently in March that shows that sheep and cattle going out in the mud trying to find some kind of water or whatever. They're getting stuck in the mud. The crows are attacking their eyes and blinding them, and the iguanas are eating them alive. That's what we face with the 6th extinction in terms of what's happening. So there's a lot of issues there.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Here we go.
My name is Ahmad. I came from Sudan. I was a refugee in this country 20 years ago. I served in the military. I'm a Iraq and American war veteran. My question to you, Sarah, too. When I was back home in Africa as a child, I grew up dreaming my country would become close to America, because American image, when I came back home, it was a very beautiful place to be. There were beautiful people. There were nice people. There were people that needed God. I grew up that way. We have a little city in Sudan called America because of American image that we have when we were kids. When war came between us and pushed us away, I came here as a refugee. I never had any issues being in America. I went to Fargo, North Dakota. I live with my white people. I don't have a problem calling people to their color. I don't offend. If you call me black, I will never get offended because I grew up in a place, color doesn't matter. Now we hesitate as a black or white to communicate with each other. Every time I tell where I work, I have to think before I spell the word out. And I bet it's the same with my white people. When you talk to me, you have to think before you spell your word out. The same with my Latino people. What are you going to do, sir, to create the image that I had when I was a child, that America is a beautiful place to be? And you should create your own space to be like that. Second question, how can you make us an America? When I sit here with this man, when I sit with this one, I feel they are my sister. I don't feel their color. When I was trained in the military, I'm a combat medic. When somebody got injured, I don't look at their color, I look at their clothes. And I know that is my soldier injured, and I have to save him or her. What will you do about this to make us not to hesitate as a black or white? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And it gets back to what makes us so unique and extraordinary in the world today and in world history. So many nations on this planet define themselves by race or by ethnicity or by common genealogy. Exceptionally, the United States defines itself by this ideal put on paper 243 years ago that we are all created equal. And the idea is that we are created equal to equal opportunity to contribute to this country's greatness. And really to be, as you just suggested, an example to other people around the world. We, of course, have never fully lived up to that idea or that ideal, but I always had the sense that we were striving to get there. That sense and that sense of progress was interrupted during this administration, where you have somebody who described Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, just based on where they're from and by extension their ethnicity, who wanted to ban the travel of all Muslims to this country, which is such an alien concept to us as Americans. It makes sense during some other period of history in some other country that you would ban all people of one religion because they are somehow inherently defective from coming to your country. When he describes asylum seekers as an infestation, that's what I would use to describe a cockroach, something that I want to stamp out or kill. It dehumanizes people, and that language allows us to treat people differently. You don't start putting kids in cages until you made it okay to think about them as less than human in this country. And that's what this president has successfully done. Describing members of the Klan, white supremacists, white nationalists, Nazis as very fine people, that sends a very clear signal to this country. And to be clear, it doesn't just offend our sensibilities or change the way that the rest of the world looks at us. It does those things, but it also causes actions and practices and policies to be implemented in this country. Hate crimes are up 3 of the last 3 years. The day that the president signed his executive order attempting to ban Muslim travel to the United States, the mosque in Victoria, Texas, in my home state, burned to the ground. So how do we meet this challenge? How do we restore our sense of who we are, our potential, our promise, what we mean to each other first and foremost, and then what we mean to the rest of the world? I think our ability to demonstrate a profound respect to one another, to, as you just said, to say, I could care less to whom you pray, or who you love, or where you came from, or where you live today. All that matters now is that you're an American first before you're anything else. And we're gonna find a way to work together, to find the common ground, to do the common good for this country. Our moments of success and triumph and breakthrough and change have always come when we've been able to see past the differences that would otherwise divide us. But this moment is the mother of all tests for that proposition, because you have someone in office who uses the most powerful bully pulpit on the planet to make us angry, afraid, to keep us apart from one another. In our division, he sees perhaps his victory. Of course, the antidote to that is finding our commonality, our shared humanity, and ability to unite despite those differences and divisions, and distinguish ourselves not by whom we hate, who we are against, who we are not, but by our common ambitions, our aspirations, the work, the sacrifice, the service we're willing to employ and bring to bear in order to accomplish them. That's what I want to do. And not only am I saying that, it's the way that I've worked in Congress, as Davey was introducing me, talking about the work that we did, 6 years in the minority, always finding a way to get the job done by finding that Republican colleague and partner with whom we could accomplish the goal. Campaigning across Texas, I didn't just go to the reddest place in the state of Texas, I went to the reddest place on the face of the planet. King County voted 96% for Donald Trump in 2016. You can see it glowing red from outer space as you go over the planet. But we showed up to King County because those residents are every bit as deserving of being heard, of being listened to, of being served, of being fought for. And I had no hope or prospect of delivering for them if I had not first shown up and asked what was on their minds and how we could work together. So let us, you and I and everyone here, be the example of what we want the United States to be in the way that we campaign, the way that we talk to one another, the way that we pursue our goals. Then I think we reestablish our standing in the rest of the world. Thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm a criminal justice student at Michigan State. So one of my main interests is about how we're going to tackle a lot of our criminal justice issues, such as mass incarceration, which ultimately stem from obviously our 3-strike laws, our mandatory minimums, our cash bail issues. And so I'd really like to know how you'd like to tackle our mass incarceration issue and just general issues with also like privatizing prisons, privatizing medical care in prisons so that they're not as accountable to telling us what they're doing. Because a lot of people think about, you know, somebody commits a crime, they go to jail, they go to prison, and they're out of sight, out of mind, but like they're still people, and we're treating them so inhumanely.
Thank you. Agree with the premise of your question. We have approximately 2.3 million of our fellow Americans behind bars at this moment as we enjoy our freedom and are participating in our democracy. It's the largest prison population on the face of the planet. And it's happening right here at home, and that prison population is disproportionately comprised of people of color, including so many there for nonviolent drug crimes, including the possession of marijuana, a substance that is legal, decriminalized, medicinalized in the majority of the states of this union, and yet you can be locked up for possession. Upon release, every job that you apply for going forward, you'll be forced to check a box saying that you have a conviction, making it less likely that you get that job. You no longer qualify for student loans to go to Michigan State or any institution of higher education. To improve yourself and your prospects and to be able to improve this country. How did we get here? Is this something that just started? Unfortunately, it is foundational to who this country is. Last year, they just found, as they were clearing land for a new school in Fort Bend Independent School District in Texas, mass graves. They found the bodies of 95 children and men buried from 1878 to 1911. As young as 14 years old as 70. They were part of a convict leasing program. All of them African American, working for Imperial Sugar and other companies in that part of Southeast Texas. When the employers needed labor, they would go to local law enforcement who would arrest black children and men for loitering, for speaking too loud in public, for just being black, effectively, and literally worked them to death. We see signs from the skeletons of muscles torn from the bone in these fields. We have, ever since the end of Reconstruction in the United States of America back in the 19th century, been criminalizing communities of color. And what you just described is the latest iteration of this problem. So yes, we need criminal justice reform, end the war on drugs, end the prohibition of marijuana, expunge the arrest records of everyone caught for possession of a substance that's legal in most of the rest of the country, but that's not going to get at the root of the problem. When we look at the evidence of the structural challenge, 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America. At 4 or 5 years old, a child in a kindergarten classroom, if she or he is a child of color, is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled as a white kid. The legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and suppression, and I say this in a state that ranked 50th in voter turnout, not because we like our democracy less than you do here in Iowa, but people, the courts found, this isn't me saying, based on their race and ethnicity, were drawn out of congressional districts. Their vote diminished, the power of their voice silenced, and that's happening in this country in our lifetimes. So we have to get at the structural truths, the full, complete story of how this country built its wealth, upon whose backs that was done, and the inequity and inequality that still persists today, evidenced in our criminal justice system, but in every other facet of life in America today. If we're willing to do that, as difficult as that sounds to do, then we can begin the work of repair, and we can begin to ensure that we do not visit this injustice on future generations. So I want to work with you on criminal justice, on some of those proposals that I just outlined, but I want to make sure that we go deeper to the structural problems that we have in this country if we're ever going to get it right. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
Okay, this is going to be our last question.
Hello. I work with families that have lower limited income, and we very much appreciate your interest in increasing the minimum wage. But even at $15 an hour, that's only $31,200 a year. So what other kinds of work supports would you promote if you're president?
Thank you for the question. Childcare is one of the greatest expenses for families right now. Making sure that it's affordable, doubling the block grants that come from the federal government to state governments that can use that to ensure that there's more affordable childcare. That's a great start. Ensuring that the tax code reflects the cost of childcare. It makes it a little bit easier for parents, including those who stay at home, to be able to afford childcare for their children. Extending universal public school education from kindergarten, which is 4 or 5 years old, to pre-kindergarten, which is 3 or 4 years old. It comes at some cost, but if you look at it as an investment, and economists have, for every $1 we put into universal pre-K in this country, we get $9 back as a country and as an economy. These are some of the steps that we can take. In addition, we must pay those child care workers a living wage. One of the perverse ironies of child care in the United States of America right now is many of those providing the care cannot afford to receive that care themselves. I mentioned the importance of unions earlier. SEIU, for one, has a proposal to ensure that more child care workers get better training, which means better care for our kids, but it also means that they can organize for better working conditions, better wages, have an apprenticeship program that means that we're getting the very best out of our fellow Americans. I mentioned ending discrimination in the workplace. I talked about it in terms of gender, but in Texas, you can be fired for being gay. You can be refused hire for being gay. We discriminate based on sexual orientation. That's why, as president, I want to sign into law the Equality Act, which ensures the protected civil rights of every single American without exception. Not only is that morally the just thing to do, economically, it allows us to be hitting on all cylinders with every single one of us able to fully participate in the economy. Paid family leaves that you can take time off to take care of yourself or your kids or your folks. These are some of the steps that we can take to make sure that we support the American worker so that they can achieve their full potential and ensure that this country lives up to its full promise. Thank you for the question. Thank you all for your time here today. Thank you for introducing us. Tim, thank you for organizing. Jen, thanks for meeting us out at the MAD. Thank you all for your questions and your attention today. We are grateful. Gracias.